I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and about a block and a half off of the university campus. So it was a part of my life from the time I was a little boy who played up there, went in the buildings and slid down the fire escapes. And so when it came time to go to college, I had a job and a girlfriend, and I wanted to stay in Wichita. So I stayed there, and I did both of my degrees, my MFA and my BFA there, and felt like it was a small department, 6 faculty members plus a couple part-timers. So it was kind of intimate. I was I felt well acquainted with and familiar with all those professors. It gave me my model for what I wanted to do, because I'd already decided I wanted to teach at a college level. And so I looked for little departments, and really I didn't find anything that anyone who wanted me as a brand new, greenhorn. But I came up here to Parkland, which was just a fledgling community college. I didn't know anything about community colleges. What I knew was I was a little not too sure about. But I came for the job, and they had no campus yet. We were in storefronts, and the school as a facility was terrible, but the people were all young people and exciting, and I was happy to be here. And I just ended up staying here, and I realized I had the best job you could ever want. My dad was a chemist, and he worked for an oil refining company. Same company, although the company sold and so on. He worked in the same place for his whole working life. My mother was a grade school music teacher, vocal music. And so they were interested in art and the arts, and I always had stuff to work with. I wasn't one of those kids who just drew all the time. That was my whole thing. I did do that, but I also played baseball and ran around. And so it was just another interest. But because I got some support for that. Music was the art in our house. I was the one who didn't do that, but it was a possible way of work. I'm not sure would have been their choice, but I never got any of the discouragement or the how are you going to make a living kind of talk that I know young people get. We knew someone. My sister was dating and ultimately married the son of the head of the art department at the university. So, and those people also went to our church, and so my folks kind of knew artists, real professional artists, and I think had a high regard for such a thing. So it wasn't such a scary idea as it sometimes is to parents. The reason I wanted to become an artist is because I saw, as a kid of about 9th grade, I saw a show at the Art Museum of abstract expressionist painters, big giant Klein and de Kooning and all the big guys. And I was excited by that. And I did a research paper in high school about modern art, and read a lot about it. And I determined that's what I want to do. If that's what an artist is, that's me. So when I began school, that was my whole goal. The conflict started right away because what art school was about was to learn to draw. Wichita was just coming out of that period of time when drawing was taboo, and they were re-establishing that tradition of instruction. And so I was learning to draw realistically, but what my heart was in the idea of big painting and aggressive large brushes and throwing stuff at the canvas. So when it got to graduate school, I'd already kind of evolved into a representational painter, but I was still trying to make it as raw and rough and painterly as I could, resisting the idea in my paintings, not in my drawings, of being tight and realistic. So when I finished grad school, what I had was a body of work that was kind of very rough, but representational, realistic stuff, imagery. I'm not sure the landscape did, but the fact that I moved away from everything I'd known, and I moved away from artists and an art community of students and professors, and was on my own. I'd been warned about this. I'd talked about this with my graduate professors, and they said, you know, once you get on your own, you're going to find out what it's like to be an artist, and it can be rough. And that was true. And besides, I didn't really have any real teaching experience, so I was 100% involved and stressed about doing that job and learning how to do it, doing it well. So my work began to take second place. I had to do this. Plus we were married and tiny kids, and you know, our lives were filled. So the idea of moving to a new place, it wasn't the place so much as the situation I was in that did affect my work a lot. The way it actually affected it was because I was teaching realistic drawing all day. And I did teach painting too, but my main emphasis was teaching drawing. I was making drawings because I wanted to have examples to show my students, and I was trying to keep that thread in all parts of my life, you know, constant. But more and more I got fascinated and interested in making what I consider real work, my real work, not the big paintings, which I was still doing, but making these little drawings. And I started working with Prismacolor pencils, which were, I believe at that time, a brand new product. And I said, oh, this is something exciting. And so bit by bit, as I was making these drawings, I started using whatever materials I had, including, I had taken the one required watercolor class when I was a sophomore in college, and so I had some materials, and so I started putting them into my drawings, and that was the thing that happened that led me finally to this lifetime of painting with watercolor, putting it into the drawings. Well, I have a lot of favorite things by now. 50 years later, the central core of my work is a slow building, layering process, building color as you build depth and atmosphere. But at the same time, I love the dynamic aspect of painting, so I'd like to paint on location with a great big fat brush and I usually paint with small. I paint on a block 11 by 14, so a little smaller than that. 3-hour paintings and see what I can do. It's the antidote to my long hours, you know, day after day after day, sometimes weeks spent on painting, building slowly. I love it both ways. And the third kind of thread of my work is employing drawing materials along with watercolor. Sometimes I'd make a semi full-blown graphite rendered drawing underneath, then paint on top. And sometimes the drawing gets so interesting that I never get to the watercolor. I just leave it. And sometimes I like to leave it halfway so that you see the drawing was there, you see the relationship between the two, and you see what the watercolor did to that drawing. So I enjoy that. I like the look of it. So those are the three ways I work. I think the main thing that people know my work is that it's just very controlled and realistic looking. And I like that. I'm always happy I never get tired of seeing if I can do that. Initially, as I was creeping slowly into becoming a watercolor painter, thinking this was just going to be a passing thing, that would be shortly after I came up to Illinois and began teaching, first couple of teaching years. That's when all these drawings were happening, and as my professor said, I was starting over, trying to reestablish myself. What do? Well, you go back to drawing. That has actually been an idea that's followed me all my life. Whenever I kind of wear out what I'm doing or feel like I've lost the thread, I go back and make drawings for a while, and it takes me somewhere new. Well, in their various ways, you talk about the masters. I've always respected them, but now, as looking back, I understand what they are, what they've done. I can unravel it. I can see their way. So I respect them or appreciate them, I guess is the word, even more. So Homer, Sargent particularly for his on location things, just amazing. The guy could draw so well. William Trost Richards really interests me. And kind of on the other hand, people like Marin, very exciting, and kind of belongs to that early urge I had to become an artist, that abstract way, and yet still telling the story about New York City in a dynamic environment. Birchfield really interests me. I marvel at his things. I think about him when I'm in the woods, you know. You almost can look at his pictures and think, well, I can hear those birds. I can hear that scratching sound. What is that? And somehow he made that, you know, manifest on this page. It's amazing. So those are among, but I also love looking at the photorealist painters, a lot of whom can really manage watercolor well. Richard Estes, you know, was strong. One of my early influences was, in fact, the way he helped me transition from my want to be an abstract expressionist to a guy who could draw and could still paint kind of loose. Larry Rivers. Larry Rivers was kind of a bridge guy for me. Jim Dine. So those guys don't make work quite like mine, but they were people who loved drawing as I do, and drawing was central to what they were doing. And maybe not watercolor painters, but close enough. You find out over time, oh my gosh, really? This guy was this guy's teacher, or these guys lived together in some crummy studio in Soho, or whatever it is, you know. I somewhere along the way in my teaching, I became aware of some short black and white videos about artists. And one of them was, I like to show my students, was Chuck Close in his early time. And in this, he was painting, you know, from his little grid and his little photographs, one grid at a time. And he was in this kind of big, awful, you know, loft studio with the windows are open and you hear the traffic down below, and his radio's on. And I only tell you this because I've always worked at home, and that meant kids, TV, chaos, you know, stuff going on around me. So much so that's established my pattern, and to this day, I'll turn on TV just for sound. I turn on music too. I'm maybe more productive. It's not like listening, it's just getting that environment going around me that seems to help me work. It makes me comfortable, at least. I have shown quite a bit. Early on, I showed in a lot of jury shows. Didn't start doing solo shows till I was established as somebody, you know, significant as a watercolor painter. After Chicago, that was, in a way, in my mind, that gave me my own credibility. I always thought this would be a success once I had a big city gallery, and so I did that bit for a few years. And out of that, I began to get invitations to show and things, and so that's allowed me to get a record of some shows. The work that really established me, although I was painting landscapes in my first gallery years, the work that really established me was my industrial things. In fact, when I first started doing those, after I'd done a few, I was talking to Harold Greger, and he said, "Don, you know, you're jumping around from subject to subject. I'd make 6 or 8 paintings, which for me was a year. So it didn't seem like jumping around. But he said, you know, the gallery wants you to have, you know, some kind of a predictable thread. And you should stick with this industry. He said, you really do it well and nobody else is doing it. And I did for about 15 years. Got very involved in it. I loved doing them. I went on driving trips to visit factories all over the eastern part of the country. Figured out a way of getting in them and explaining to people what I wanted. Why did you want to come in here with a camera? You're an artist? Is that like a, you know, they didn't know what I wanted. But I had enough work then I could show them, this is what I make. Oh, and so then they would show me every nut and bolt in the place. And each one would recommend, well, have you talked to so-and-so? And so then that would give me an entree into the next factory somewhere down the line. And worked great for me.
Yeah.
I only stopped doing that when we bought this Kansas property. And I suddenly was in love with that land, that place, and the idea of painting it. And so I kind of quit doing industry, or rarely did it. I would kind of dip back into there once in a while. But I stopped doing the factory visits. So that vibe, that sense of, you know, that feel for it was not near as strong when I was just going back and looking at old photos and trying to go off memory. But anyway, I painted the landscape then, that particular landscape, for 15 years or so, and so my life is kind of divided up into these chunks, you know, if I think of it in that way, even though it's not exclusively landscape. I mostly was painting that, and so not so often in the industry. It's about making the work. That's when nothing else is happening, you still have to make the work, because that's what I do, that's what I want to do. So in the end, I always say that's the ultimate reward, probably the surest reward, that was the way to put it, is the satisfaction you get of making things. The time of day I feel best is early afternoon through about 6, 7 o'clock. That's when I work more or less now every day. I'm not a morning maker. I haven't ever been, because I got up and went to work. And the reason I work in shorter bursts is because as a teacher, you know, I would come home from top full-time, 5 days a week, 2 nights a week, and I didn't have a lot of time to paint. So after we got the kids down in the evening, my wife's also an artist, we would use that time till about midnight or so to work, so maybe 2-3 hours work. And that became so much a part of the way I worked, and the fact that I worked in little bit at a time, making things, that's the way I still work. A little bit at a time, over time, for most of the things I make, slow development. And I really can't, I don't feel productive after about 4 hours or so, 3 or 4 hours. So that's the way I still work. Yeah, I have had those down times, and I wouldn't say surly, but I'm just not happy when I'm not working or not making something. So I try always to make something, even if it is just drawing in a sketchbook or something. Sometimes I'm listening to Rachel Maddow and I just make little designs because I can't stand to just sit there, you know. And yet I want to be upstairs and be with my wife, and so I have sketchbooks full of those little, you know, thumbnail things, and sometimes those turn into something. Sometimes they lead me somewhere, but mostly they're just exercising my, whatever we were just talking about, however you describe that, need to make things. I think, first of all, you have to persuade yourself, convince yourself, assure yourself that you really want to do this. This is important enough to me that I will not do other things because I want to be doing this. And I think having dealt with a lot of students, you know, I taught for 38 years, and so I've been down this road with lots of people. Do you really really, really want to be an artist. If you do, you can make it happen. You can figure it out. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in my own life, what most mattered to me and what continues to matter to me, central to my work, is drawing. I learn to draw, find out what that can do for you. Think on the page is a good way to put it. Because if you're gonna make any kind of realistic work, you have to know you can draw, and you have to enjoy the idea of capturing this thing on the page. I've never gotten tired of that, drawing one idea that, wow, I can see these shapes, and somehow if I draw those shapes, that pretty soon it's there, it's on the page. And so I think you have to believe that, establish that, even if it's just the skill aspect. But in the process of getting that skill, I think you get the rest of the thing of what drawing does for you as an artist. I would say about watercolor, and particularly when people look at my work, they see this realistic work it's been realistic for a long time, and I think they wonder if I'm just making the same thing I learned to make. Every time I started painting, I always told my students, I always start out with, I wonder if I can do this. I have that, and so that means there's a problem to be solved. You have to just rediscover it every time. When I started out making watercolor, I thought, oh, well, this is just watercolor, because my professors and the people around me didn't take watercolor very seriously, so I didn't. I thought it was, some kind of a little Sunday painter deal. And as I got into it, I still thought that. And little by little, I realized, wow, this is like a universe of possibilities. And so, after 50-some years of doing this, I would say, I'm just getting a good start. So I've never gotten tired of it, and I wish I had more years than I probably have to keep opening the next chapter. I work so slowly that I always have felt a little push to get it done. Let's get this one done, get on to the next one. And the galleries certainly exacerbated that feeling. And once I kind of decided for myself, and this came really when the galleries collapsed around 2000 with the tech collapse in the stock market. All the corporations quit buying art, and galleries went out of business, including mine. And so I realized, hey, I'm on my own now. I found this quite stressful to be doing this, even though it was my heart's desire. I'm not going to do that anymore. I have a friend, you probably know him, George Atkinson. He came to the same point in his very successful in New York, selling, Sherry French gallery, and at some point he got so burned out with the gallery thing and the whole stress of making art, he said, I don't want to do this anymore. And instead of doing what I did, just went back into my own little environment as an artist. He said, I'm not doing it anymore. And I think it's a shame, because he's the most amazing pastel artist. I mean, he's the best. So anyway, well, I think it's a dynamic between the artist and the seller, and the buyer, that it's a dance that you don't want to look at too closely sometimes. You don't always want to know everything that happened. Everyone seems to find a different way, and I think that's interesting, because you can find a way. If you really need to do this, you'll figure it out. And that's how I used to tell my students this, and I always hoped that I was being honest with them about that. I hope that they did find the way, because I told them they could.
you.